Thank you all for coming out. I'm really pleased to have so many bright and smiling faces here today. We're going to be talking about a side project that I've been working on since January called Virtuoso. And if you want to follow along with a potential demo that could happen here in a few minutes, you're going to want to go to this link on GitHub. That is where you will find the repository for this framework that I'm going to be speaking about. Who am I? That's a great question. I ask it of myself sometimes. I'm Justus, Eapen. I'm a developer at SmartLogic. We are a software consultancy out of Baltimore, Maryland. We're a real small shop, but we make really cool apps for all sorts of companies. And I'm really happy to see my colleagues here. We've also got another talk here at ElixirConf tomorrow that you should all go see with my buddy Eric, who's in the second to last row with the great beard and the green shirt. I had an awesome GIF here, but it's not going to show up. So just forget about that. So why are we talking about chatbots here? Why are we talking about another framework, and why are we talking about it in Elixir? So I'm going to start this off with a little bit of a philosophical discourse, because I do think that whenever you're going to be working on something, you should actually have your heart in it, and it should mean something to you. And the reason I'm working on this framework, Virtuoso, is because I'm deeply interested in artificial intelligence and the future of technology and how artificial intelligence is going to unfold. I'm sure a lot of you know about the singularity, the search for human-level intelligence. I think that in some sense, it's sort of like the divine imperative is to create something more or less like yourself. And this is a painting. Some of you, anyone know what it's called? It's by Michelangelo. It's on the top of the Sistine Chapel. It's called The Creation of Adam. And it shows us that of this idea that we were made in God's image. And that idea is recursive. So we have to then go and make something in our image. And so that's why I'm talking about AI. Julian Jaynes, who influenced my ideas on cognition, said that language is the poetry that consciousness is made of. So we're talking about chatbots because conversation is going to be the medium through which we develop human-level intelligence. Jaynes wrote a book in, I want to say the 70s, called The Origins of Consciousness and the Breakdown of the Bicameral Mind. And it posited a theory that early humans essentially experienced cognition and sort of the verbal stream of consciousness that we're all aware of. They experienced it as coming from a third party or like another entity. And so the best example of this is in Westworld, when someone's like talking to the robot, and the robot, or Arthur is talking to the robot, and the robot gets its instructions from Arthur, but it thinks that it's its own thoughts. That's actually all based on an idea that Julian Jaynes came up with, that essentially our mind was divided into a master and an emissary, as Ian McGilchrist put it. So we're working on chatbots because even though we're far away from human-level intelligence, I do think at the end of the day, it's going to come down to chatbots or AIs conversing with human beings, conversing with each other, and also introspecting using language, because that's how our consciousness evolved. And so once upon a time, we tried to build a bot at SmartLogic, and we ran into some problems. I think the biggest problem that we ran into is that there's not really a clear architectural design or convention for building chatbots. MVC is what we're all familiar with when we're building web apps. It works great for any view-based application. It works really poorly with conversations because conversations don't have views. You're not clicking on things. You are just winging it, really. And robots don't deal with that sort of unstructured information very well. So we needed to come up with an agent architecture that would be a little bit easier to apply to this particular domain. So the solution is what we're temporarily calling a bimodal cognitive handoff architecture. And I'm going to get into what that means here in a minute. But why Elixir? Well, you already know. There's performance benefits, there's concurrency, there's developer happiness, there's functional programming. These are, I think, the current state of the art in our field, and we're all really lucky to be working with such a great language. So it should be obvious why we're using Elixir. However, there's also this point that domain-driven contexts are particularly well suited for this problem of agents having conversations and executing routines. So what is Virtuoso? Virtuoso is a framework for developing and orchestrating chatbots from a central repository. How does it work? Builds on the shoulders of giants. Way back in the day, the first conversational agents were using an architecture called command and response. This is still the most common architecture that you'll see. It's essentially, I say hi, the agent recognizes that and has a response preset to respond to hi. Or if you say, what is today? They'll have a map with a key that says, today's date, and they're just gonna look for that and respond with a preset value. So it's essentially like pattern matching. It's as simple as it gets. Later on, we got a little bit more sophisticated. We've got finite state architectures. These are basically trees of behavior. So you've got a preset conversational model, maybe, hey, how are you? What are you doing today? How do you feel? What is your mood? Blah, blah, blah. But it's a preset list of questions, and the responses will not change the flow of the conversation. So at any given moment, you've got a set of states, maybe the first message, the second message, third message, and you're just going to go through that conversation, and the bot doesn't really have any. Best case scenarios, you've essentially got forks, but at the end of the day, you've got a set of decisions to be made, and they're preset, and there's no really cognition or intelligence there. The current state of the art is what's called frame-based architectures. Frame-based architectures are a lot smarter than finite-based or finite state architectures. So a frame-based architecture basically says, okay, I've got a list of information that I need to accomplish a goal. Okay, so if I want to book a flight, I need to know an origin, I need to know a destination, I need to know a date of departure, blah, blah, blah. Now, a frame-based architecture is going to ask questions until it gets the answers that it needs. And it can get those answers in any order. So that's actually really smart, right? Because then I can say to the robot, hey, robot, I want to get a flight to Seattle on September 4th. And all of a sudden, two of the major points that it needs in its frame for booking a ticket are filled. And it knows what the remaining slots in the frame are to complete, and it'll try to fill in those gaps with additional questions. And integrated with all of this is natural language processing, which you've all heard about. Maybe you've implemented it using a third-party library. It comes down to understanding text and generating text. So understanding text is saying, given this message, what is the user's intent? Are they trying to book a plane ticket? Are they trying to greet you? Are they trying to get you to tell them a joke? Like, what is the user's intent? And entities. Entities are substrings within the message that are relevant to the completion of the task. So, for example, an entity might be a location, and that location might be Seattle. And so you'll use natural language processing to understand what the user wants to do and the entities that the user is conveying to you to help you accomplish the task as the robot. So what we need is a framework that layers these ideas together in a way that is easy and fun for developers. Okay, like what did Rails do in like 2001? They took MVC, which was like a conventional architecture at the time. They took object-oriented programming. They took, whatever they were doing, like 2001, and they put them together in a really nice convention-based package that you could use to develop web apps like that. For chatbots to become as popular as I think we all thought they were going to become in like 2015 when all the hype was happening and we thought that chatbots were going to be everywhere and that they were going to be ordering food for us and doing our laundry, like none of that happened yet. And in my opinion, it's because we don't really have a Rails for chatbots yet. Thinking fast and slow. Some of you may have heard of the seminal work by the behavioral psychologist Daniel Kahneman in 2011. It's like sold 1.5 million copies, called Thinking Fast and Slow. Nobody's heard of it? Anybody here? There we go. We've got a few people that have heard of this really popular book. Fast thinking are cognitive processes that happen quickly and with no deliberation. So if I throw something at someone and they catch it, they didn't ask themselves, should I catch this thing that they're throwing at me? Should I not? They just do, right? It's all precognition, essentially. There's no stream of consciousness helping you work that out. Slow thinking are cognitive processes that do require deliberation and intentional cognition. They're hard. It's like solving a difficult math problem or giving a talk. We all intuitively grasp these concepts because we all deal with them every single day, right? Like everything that you do is either a reaction without deliberate thought or an intentional cognitive process. And so I think you might see where I'm going with this, is that we need to use these metaphors of cognition, of psychology, that makes sense intuitively to create a framework that we can develop within the bounds of and develop conventions around that come very intuitively to new developers joining projects or experienced developers who are just greenfielding a project. But for any architecture to be widely adopted, it needs to be intuitive enough and easily understood enough to pick up and run with it and build something useful. So in Virtuoso, the main interface for your bot, in this case, is super duper simple. You've got a fast thinking alias, a slow thinking alias, and a routine module. You've got recipient IDs that, in this case, like a Facebook page would be a recipient, someone that you're gonna send messages to. You've got getters, because you could have multiple bots, for example, speaking through multiple Facebook pages, and you want to be able to orchestrate this all through one repository, and the reasons for that I can get into. And then you've got a main pipeline for the bot. You pass things through a fast thinking interface, you pass things through a slow thinking interface, and then you run a routine. These interfaces, well, I'll show you in a minute. So quick recap. You've got messaging platform clients, you've got executive delegation of messages that come into the framework. You've got cognitive pattern matching, which means you're either pattern matching on the structure of the message that's getting passed in or on the message itself, and you know immediately what the user's intent is based on the structure of the message or like a keyword of the message, okay? Command and response. Or you fall back to a slow thinking architecture where you're using NLP analysis to figure out what the user's intent is, what the entities in the message are. You've got routines. Routines are things that happen, okay? Actuators, essentially, in robotics terminology. And you've got the conversation state. So you've got all the messages that have taken place within a conversation. This is what that looks like in practice. I don't know if you guys can read that, but basically you've got a platform client handing off to a conversations module, handing off to the Virtuoso executive, who's then saying, okay, can I match this against something in the fast thinking module? No. Can I match it against something in the slow thinking module? Yes. And then I go to the Virtuoso routine, which you've defined as a part of your project. Okay, so I guess you guys probably want to see a demo. All right, so I broke it while I was trying to not break it, and I can tell you why. Because I wanted to demo for you guys how to add a new routine. And so right now, if you go to the Virtuoso library on GitHub, you'll see that there is a directory called Memento Mori. Memento Mori was the first bot that I was trying to build in order to test the framework as I went. So initially we pulled most of the ideas from this out of a bot that we built for Facebook Messenger. And you need a way to sort of test in the directory what you're doing. So I made Memento Mori. She really just says hello at this point, but I wanted to show you how to add a routine. So adding a routine is super duper simple in this architecture because essentially either you're going to get a keyword, like a specific thing from the user that you know how to respond to, or you're going to have to pass it off to NLP. So in this case, let's look at the fast thinking module. So by default, the fast thinking module only has one run execution, and it just passes the impression on through. If you would like to, Elixir makes this so beautiful, so simple, to add a new routine to the fast thinking module, you just add another run definition that catches on the structure of the impression that matters. So in this case, I'm adding a trivial routine that will catch on a message that is 25. And if it catches on that message, it's going to merge this intent into the impression map. And it will then continue going through the pipeline to the slow thinking module. The slow thinking module will essentially let it go the way that it is because it already has an intent. So once the intent is figured out, everything else basically says just keep going. Just keep going the way you are. Because the entire point of cognition is to figure out what the intent is. And if the intent requires specific entities to be extracted from the message, then it'll do that in the slow thinking module. So now, if this works, it'll be lovely. If you go to Facebook and you say hello, and then let's go look at our server to make sure that message is going through. So it's broken because of some changes that I've made. Probably just break, this routine is not pattern matching correctly or something along those lines. But essentially, in this case, it should say yo back at me. But if I said 25, it should say how long I've got left to live. In the trivial version of that routine that I showed earlier, which is right here. So this is obviously a very trivial routine. It's just saying, you have 25 years left to live, no matter, or 52 years left to live, no matter how old you are, because it's just checking for the number 25. But you can see that as long as the impression has the intent that you're looking for, it's going to run the routine that corresponds to that intent. And so I'm really sorry this demo is not going to work smoothly because of technical difficulties that I've inflicted upon myself in trying to build routines 5 minutes before my talk. But I did want to sort of just take you through the code in the pipeline so you could see essentially the way that the framework is laid out is so simple that any level of experienced developer could figure this out. Because essentially any feature you want to add to your bot is going to be either adding a new routine or changing an existing one. And pretty much every routine is going to fall into this category of either a fast thinking routine, meaning something that you can match against the structure. For example, with Facebook. Facebook has what are called postback messages. Postback messages are buttons that you can press. Those buttons will have values tagged onto them. And if a user presses a button, you know without a shadow of a doubt what their intent is, because it's just like the same old, architecture that we're used to, where you get like one of finite states basically, and you know how to respond to that. With slow thinking, you might get entities and you might get intents, and you need to see if you can get those. And if you can, you want to set them into the impression and just pass it right on through to the routine, and the routine will know how, like whatever routine that you've built will know how to execute based on the intent and the entities. So that should be pretty simple and clear. I want to get to the roadmap because this is actually pretty critical based on what we've talked about already. Oh, the other thing is, if you want to go through on the GitHub page, if you want to go through and like try to follow along with the quick start, right now the only client that we're working with is Facebook Messenger. Facebook is a nightmare to deal with. I don't know if any of you have tried to make a Facebook Messenger bot. Yeah, okay, it's a nightmare. And here's why it's a nightmare. It's because you need to have a page. Okay, the page is the client's experience, like the user's experience is they're gonna go to a page and they're gonna click a button and they're gonna send a message to you. Okay, that message is gonna get relayed from your page to a Facebook app that you've built, okay? The app needs to have a few things from the page. In our architecture, you need to have what's called the recipient ID. The recipient ID is just a number that's assigned to the page, but you don't get it until you get a message. So you have to get at least one message, and then you have to get that recipient ID out. I haven't figured out a better way to do this yet other than just like sending a failing message and then getting that recipient ID back, and then that's how the bot says, okay, I'm gonna send back to that Facebook page, because you might have a bot that talks to multiple Facebook pages, right? So you got the pages, you got the apps, you need to have a Facebook page that talks to a Facebook app. If you want to talk about this like in detail, like if you're working on one, like come see me, because I've done this now like a dozen times, like just in the last 2 days. You have a page access token that you need to include in your config, and you essentially need to map your bot to the app and to the page. So Facebook is like the worst possible place to start building a bot, but it's also kind of the best, because I think that bot, you get like a trial by fire in terms of building this thing with like all the possible bells and whistles, but also all the possible gotchas. You'll need an ngrok tunnel to build on Facebook, because they need to pass you messages through a secure HTTPS protocol, and you'll need Phoenix, obviously. All right, so the roadmap. I'm really excited to talk about this because I'm going to keep working on this, and I think that like if you are interested in building chatbots, you should like pull this code and break it and take a look at it, because it's going to be super duper helpful, especially if you're looking at Facebook Messenger, which I think you should be, because by and far, Facebook Messenger is the biggest platform for bots in the United States anyway. So we're going to do more clients. I want to make the Facebook Messenger client really a little bit more robust, so it can handle those postbacks that I was telling you about, the structured messages that get passed through. And I also want to add Twitter and SMS clients, because I don't know about you, but like all of my current bots that are on the internet are just sitting on Twitter making fun of people. And I think that it should be a lot easier for you to make those bots that sit on Twitter and make fun of people. And so I'm going to try to provide you with that client library to do that as extensively and easily as possible. I want to add something called Wizard of Oz routines. These are basically when given a specific intent, again, like let's say you get a message from the user. Okay, the message is passed down the pipeline. The fast thinking module says, I don't recognize that. Slow thinking module says, this is a new intent. It's something I've never seen before. What if that message then got sent to you as the developer, and then you could respond to it on behalf of the agent? And so you're the man behind the curtain, you're the Wizard of Oz. And so this is just a way that you could essentially have a better user experience, but also sort of learn what your users are getting into, and maybe even down the road, feed that information back into your machine learning models or whatever you're using to generate responses to teach the bot how to talk. And finally, frames. We talked about frame-based architectures and how they're state-of-the-art at the moment. We haven't built any good frame handling libraries or toolkits yet. I'm really interested to see if anyone comes up with one in Elixir. I honestly haven't even seen any good ones in like Ruby, so I do feel like this is sort of like blue ocean as far as conversational technology is concerned. And here's the most important part. How can you help if you're interested in this kind of thing? Well, you can go to the URL that I posted earlier, JustusEapen/Virtuoso at GitHub, and stars and PRs. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. If you got a computer in front of you right now, stars and PRs. And that is the extent of my talk, so thank you very much. I'm happy to take any questions.
So how do you handle message state historic? Oh, you want me to get the mic?
Sure. Great question. I can even show you the code.
Yeah. So let me break it to the mic. How do you handle historical state and history, basically?
Great. So in memory, we have a gen server conversation module that Eric actually helped us out with when we first did this on a chatbot that we did for the city of Baltimore. It's like just like a side project at the company. And you can see up here, we've got this gen server conversation module that basically maintains a conversation struct that keeps the sender ID, the last received at, all the messages in the conversation, the process ID, and any environmental variables that are relevant. So every single message that gets sent or received, it gets attached to this running process that you can then access history of the current conversation that you're in. So this is not super duper useful unless you're doing sophisticated things on the ML side, or when you start getting into the frame-based approach, it'll be super duper useful. It's also not useful for across conversations. So if the conversation times out, I think at like a minute or something, then you lose that state. So what you want to do is on timeout. I've tried to avoid doing essentially like anything with a database here because I just want it to be like a framework that you can kind of plug into an existing Phoenix project. But obviously you're going to want to save that struct as a JSON object on a table in order to refer back to them and manage users or whatever you're trying to handle across time. Ryan? I met him earlier. I don't just know everybody's name.
Hey, thanks for the presentation.
Thank you.
Do you use automated testing anywhere in here to ensure that, I guess, the behaviors you're developing work the way you expect?
Yeah, so this has been an ongoing problem because anytime, all natural language processing is probabilistic, right? Like you're getting, this is the intent and here's my confidence interval, right? So it's difficult to test anything that gets past to that level of the architecture. So essentially what we do, I just mock, like all the responses from third-party providers, and that allows us to test like those NLP responses that are important. Everything else is pretty straightforward, right? Like if you want to do unit tests on your routines, that's pretty straightforward. If the framework is it's got like, I think like 60% test coverage, not great, but I'm working on it. So you should automate test everything. Yeah. Great. Okay, this was so wonderful. Thank you all for coming out. I would love to just hang out and have more conversation. I've got a bunch of swag up here from Smart Logic. If you like pastels, I've got pink shirts. I've got baby blue shirts. I've got yellow shirts. And I've got reusable straws so you can stop using disposable straws, which kill sea turtles. Okay, thank you.